Hi, I'm Misha Ketchell, editor of The Conversation. For democracy to work, people need to be well informed. That's why we work with academic experts to share their research and explain issues in the news. Everything we do is free to republish, but we need your support. Please donate to The Conversation by going to donate.theconversation.com or following the link in the show notes.
From The Conversation, this is Politics with Michelle Grattan.
Jim Chalmers' fifth budget contains some sweeping and contentious changes to the tax arrangements for housing. The government argues that what it's doing will help younger people get into the housing market more easily. But the opposition is flatly opposed to the changes and simply accuses the government of being a high-taxing administration. Today we're joined by Shadow Treasurer Tim Wilson for his critique of the budget. Tim Wilson, Jim Chalmers says that the budget won't be in surplus until the mid-2030s. How quickly do you think the budget should be back in surplus?
We always want the budget to be in surplus, but the reality of what this government is doing is making it very hard to do so. We'll be outlining our fiscal priorities in light of the budget reply tomorrow night. But one of the biggest concerns of this budget is they keep increasing debt. We're now projected out to be $1.25 trillion by the forward estimates, and there is no spending constraint to the scale. Government is continuing to grow faster than the private economy this year, and the government doesn't have the focus they need to get spending down, therefore debt down, therefore to make sure it's in surplus.
So without being precise, do you think a Liberal government could at least do better than the mid-30s?
Well, we certainly will target a lot of the basic work that needs to be done around cutting spending. This government has been dragged kicking and screaming to stop things like the fraud and corruption in the NDIS, the phantom children being enrolled in childcare services. What we're seeing is disturbing behaviour, NDIS-like, around home care age packages, as well as, of course, the $15 billion given to organised crime through the CFMEU. This government does not respect Australian taxpayers nor their money, and until you have that basic test of respect, you're not going to get the budget back in surplus.
I think the organised crime money, which you allege, went from the Victorian government.
And the federal government funded these projects. In fact, they're going to pile more money into these big bill projects in this budget. It provides for $3.8 billion of more federal funding to go into the suburban rail loop. When we've asked the Prime Minister whether any federal money has gone into it or whether he will audit whether any federal money has gone and found its way into the hands of bikie gangs, organised crime or criminal cartels, he simply refused to engage or even do an audit.
Now, you criticise the high tax to GDP ratio. Will the coalition produce a plan, and when, to reduce that ratio?
Well, we are critical because this is now the highest taxing government over its life in Australian history. And so we'll absolutely be producing a plan before the next election that steps through how we want to constrain spending, how we want to make sure that we stop the ongoing rampant increase in public expenditure under this government. And of course, some of these points will be discussed in the Leader of the Opposition's budget reply tomorrow night.
You've signalled, the opposition has signalled, that it will oppose the housing tax changes in the budget. Do you think that this will hamper you because it'll send a negative message to many of the younger voters who seem to favour such changes and who are pretty desperate to get into the housing market?
Well, we absolutely believe that young Australians should be able to get into the housing market. The first place to start with that is not to put upward pressure on rents, because young Australians tend to rent before they, of course, go on and buy their first home. The government's own budget documents say these tax changes will increase rents. So they're going to take from young Australians even before they're first home buyers. Then they're going to apply a higher capital gains tax on the deposits if they're invested for first home buyers. So they're going to kneecap young Australians there as well. And then when they go and buy their first home, the government's own budget documents say that these tax changes will lead to lower numbers of homes being built, 35,000 over the next decade. So we're going to have fewer homes. And the government's own budget documents say there's going to be an overshoot on migration numbers, meaning higher demand. So lower supply, higher demand, it's actually going to have the complete reverse effect in terms of reducing house prices or making them more accessible for first home buyers.
Nevertheless, I think the politics suggest that that sort of message is going to be really hard to sell for the opposition.
Well, we're also just in the business of respecting Australians and telling the truth. We're using not even our data, we're using the data from their own budget papers, which say there will be fewer homes built and higher rents under this government's tax policies. And that is not going to increase the number of young Australians getting home. I fully understand that there's been a campaign from Labor over a long period of time to try and demonise taxes as the basis for why they can't get into young Australians can't get into their first home. We've just had Bill Shorten out there boasting about how this is his secret agenda that the Australian public rejected in 2019. But what we know from their own budget documents, rents will go up. We will see higher taxes on first home deposits when they're invested. So for young Australians trying to get ahead, and fewer homes while demand will increase as well.
The Coalition's traditional strength, its fighting ground, has been economic management, but you seem to have lost that strength quite significantly in recent times. How can you get that back? And just going back to the tax question, what do you think that ratio to GDP should be?
So the way we steal our economic strength is to back in hard the self-starters of this nation, the small businesses and people who are trying to get ahead, the people who are directly targeted by these tax measures. There are so many people in Australia who woke up, went to bed last night thinking that they were in a country that actually encouraged and incentivised aspiration. And instead, what we have now is a government that's kneecapping young Australians who are putting their effort to get ahead, where hard work pays off and they feel a sense of control of their own lives. We're very much focused on how do we build out a policy program that says if you back yourself, we will back you in 500%, because the self-starters of this nation, not just the people who set up businesses, they go and employ more people. They're the ones who drive innovation and create economic opportunity for others. And we need to make sure we're backing them in. Labor's answer is how do we tax those people and sap their effort?
And on the ratio, the desirable tax to GDP?
It's obviously got to be lower than where we are at the moment, and we're always seeking to reduce it. But I'm not going to give you a specific number because we need to make sure that it's done in a way that's sustainable, that grows the economy. Because one of the biggest problems we now have is the government has a very active inflation agenda. They stoke inflation, they then tax the inflation, then they spend inflation and keep it in a vicious cycle. That's why young Australians, or all Australians, no matter how hard they work, don't feel like they're getting ahead. That's why when the government offers tax cuts, it's really only to address bracket creep, and inflation overtakes that bracket creep. Take the tax cuts they took to the last election. They were wiped out by inflation by December, and the ones they've announced last night are going to be wiped out by this December.
Of course, there's a very direct way to tackle that, and that's tax indexation. Peter Dutton flirted with that at the last election, but didn't produce a policy. Why don't you take courage in your hands and go down that route?
Courage has never been something I have lacked at all, and I'm more than happy to have these conversations over the coming months. But I just wait for the budget reply from the Leader of the Opposition tomorrow night, because I have a very different vision from the Treasurer on where he wants to take the Australian economy. His pathway of managing the Australian economy is debt, decline, and social division, starting fights around kitchen tables. My vision is focused on growth, opportunity, and empowering the next generation of Australians to seize their destiny.
Now, the government has proposed a lot of regulatory reforms in this budget. You're opposing the tax changes, but will you back those?
We're certainly very open to the efforts to reduce red tape, but the one thing I always put as an asterisk, of caution about whether they're actually going to deliver them. We've seen so many times with this government. They say we've reduced spending by $114 billion. They then in the next breath go and spend $223 billion. They make big boasts about what they're going to do in reducing green tape and red tape in this budget. Let's see them actually do it, because really what they're doing is increasing the number of people who are employed in government departments. In our experience, that simply leads to more regulation, more compliance costs on business, not actually creating growth and productivity.
I think we've seen efforts or promises to reduce red tape from both sides of politics and been disappointed in the result. But just turning to a broader question, at the weekend, of course, we saw this surge of support for Pauline Hanson. Do you think that One Nation's support is making it harder to convince people of mainstream economic policies?
Well, I think that's true of the extremist Greens. And of course, you have other parties like the one you just mentioned, who in a kind of pop consumer way think they can sell people anything without the consequences of government. So, yes, I do believe that the rise of parties of the fringe make it harder to sell mainstream messages. But that comes down to leadership and giving people a sense of confidence about where we're going and what we're trying to build. I think the next election is going to be there's going to be a lot of stark choices, but the starkest choice is going to be between the coalition and the Labor Party. The Labor Party's vision for the Australian economy is debt, decline and division. Ours has to be unity, aspiration, opportunity and growth, because that is the only way we're going to be able to lead into the future.
Just on One Nation, you had some confusing messages at the weekend about the extent to which the Liberals should embrace or not embrace One Nation, which I think you then sought to clarify. Can you just sum up very briefly what your position is on that?
All I've said in the past is that if the people of Australia vote for members of parliament to be elected, I'm not a democratic denier. I respect the will of the Australian people. But when I was asked and have been asked, will you be forming a coalition or are you seeking to form one, the answer is no. And Pauline Hanson has made that clear herself as well. I think she's now had some other confusing statements where she wants to run off and become Prime Minister or something, as she can rightly say. My focus is on how do we get 150 seats in the House of Representatives, 76 seats in the Senate for Liberal MPs, because I fundamentally believe the best interests of Australia is built off the back of a coalition government that's focused on growth and opportunity, where hard work pays off and, frankly, taxpayers feel respected because Australians have control over their lives.
Now, just finally, your colleague Andrew Hastie said, and I quote, "No one is going to reward us for a final last stand for neoliberal politics." Is neoliberalism dead?
Well, I think different political worldviews have a time. And in my book, The New Social Contract, Renewing the Liberal Vision for Australia in 2020, I talked about this and how well before Andrew made these comments, the world after the Cold War needed a shift and a change toward more choice and competition and efficiency of capital. But we're going into a different time based on geostrategic events where there's now a security premium for society. We're going to see a shift towards resilience. And the question is, how do we do that in a cost-effective way so that we can secure the nation, unite our country, but more importantly, build a better future for everyone?
Tim Wilson, thanks for joining us on this post-budget day. That's all for this podcast. Thank you to my producer, Ben Roper. We'll have an interview with the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, coming later, but goodbye for now.
Production by Ben Roper. Theme music by Lee Rosevere. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organisation. Sign up to our daily newsletter for evidence-based news and analysis, including articles from Michelle Grattan, or listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.
What are you going to have? Can I have 2 pieces of mullet, please, Pauline?
From a fish and chip shop in regional Queensland
We are in danger of being swamped by Asians.
to the heart of Australian politics, this is the unlikely story of the country's most controversial minor party.
Are you xenophobic? Please explain.
For 30 years, One Nation and Pauline Hanson have been ridiculed, dismissed and shut out. Now, no one's laughing.
One Nation continuing to surge in the polls.
Dramatic surge in support for One Nation.
I'm back.
This is The Making of One Nation from The Conversation, and you can search for it wherever you listen to podcasts.